My boyfriend said in front of his friends that if I were younger and prettier like his coworker, he would marry me. And that's why he's not sure if he wants to marry me, even after 5 years of dating. My name is Victoria, and I thought I knew everything about the man I was going to marry in 4 months. 5 years together, 8 months engaged, and suddenly he's acting like a stranger who can't decide if he wants to spend his life with me. It started 3 weeks ago with little things, when I showed him the revised guest list, down to 180 people like he requested. He just stared at it and said, "That's still a lot of people." When the florist called asking for final approval on the centerpieces we'd already chosen together, he told me to handle it alone. "You know I trust your judgment," he said, but there was something hollow in his voice. The venue coordinator called yesterday about the final headcount deadline. I found him on the couch scrolling through his phone, and when I mentioned we needed to confirm numbers, he barely looked up. "Can we talk about this later? I'm tired." But he wasn't tired enough to stop scrolling for another hour. This morning, I woke up to find him already dressed for work, coffee in hand, avoiding eye contact. "We need to discuss the catering menu," I said, following him to the kitchen. He grabbed his keys from the counter and muttered something about being late. "We can handle it this weekend," he said. But last weekend he'd said the same thing about the photographer. I've been planning this wedding mostly alone for 2 months now. Every decision gets delayed, every conversation postponed. When I bring up the honeymoon to Jamaica we booked last year, he changes the subject. When I mention the marriage counseling session his sister recommended, just to make sure we're on the same page before the big day, he says we don't need it. "Everything's fine," he keeps saying. I'm just stressed about work. But work has always been demanding, and he never used to retreat like this. The man who proposed to me 8 months ago in front of my entire family at Christmas dinner has become someone who flinches when I mention our future. The man who used to plan surprise weekend trips now acts like planning our life together is a burden. Last night I tried to recreate our first date, Chinese takeout and a movie on the couch. I thought maybe if we could reconnect without the wedding pressure, we'd find our way back to each other. Instead, he spent most of the evening checking messages from coworkers and barely touched his lo mein. "Is there something you want to tell me?" I finally asked during the movie credits. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something that terrified me. Doubt. Hesitation. Like he was seeing me clearly for the first time and wasn't sure he liked what he found. "No," he said quietly. "Everything's fine." But everything isn't fine, and we both know it. The invitations are already sent out. Elegant ivory cards with gold lettering that took us 3 hours to pick at the stationery store. My dress is hanging in the closet, a size 6 ivory silk gown with delicate beading that my mother cried over when I first tried it on. The reception hall is booked, the band confirmed, the flowers ordered. 200 people are planning to celebrate our love story in 16 weeks, and yet the groom can't seem to discuss any of it without looking like he wants to bolt. I keep thinking about how he used to talk about our future. He'd mention the house we'd buy, how many kids we wanted, where we'd retire. He'd trace patterns on my back while we lay in bed Sunday mornings and describe the kitchen we'd renovate together, the garden we'd plant, the trips we'd take for our anniversary. Those conversations feel like they happen to different people. Now, when I mention looking at houses in better school districts, he goes quiet. When I bring up opening a joint savings account like we planned, he says we should wait until after the honeymoon. When I suggest we start trying for a family next year like we used to talk about, he pretends he didn't hear me. I've started keeping a mental list of all the conversations we're not having. The photographer wants to know our preferred poses for couple shots. The band needs our first dance song choice. The travel agent is waiting for our honeymoon preferences beyond somewhere tropical. My maid of honor keeps asking when we're doing the bachelor and bachelorette parties. Soon, I keep telling everyone. We'll figure it out soon. But soon never comes, because the man I'm supposed to marry in 4 months acts like planning our wedding is a chore he keeps hoping will go away. The man who once surprised me with weekend trips to wine country now can't commit to choosing between chicken or salmon for our wedding dinner. Tomorrow we meet with Pastor Williams for our final counseling session. I've been looking forward to it for weeks, hoping that talking through our concerns with someone neutral might help us reconnect. But as I watch him scroll through his phone again tonight, avoiding another conversation about seating arrangements, I wonder if he'll even show up. The dinner was supposed to fix everything. I made his favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, and set the table with our good china. I lit candles, opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving, and changed into the blue dress he always said brought out my eyes. I thought if we could just reconnect without the wedding stress hanging over us, we'd remember why we fell in love. He came home from work looking exhausted, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. "This looks nice," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. We sat across from each other at our small dining room table, and I tried to keep the conversation light. I asked about his day, mentioned a funny story my coworker had told me, talked about anything except centerpieces and seating charts. But halfway through dinner, I couldn't hold back anymore. "We need to talk about what's been happening," I said, setting down my fork. "You've been distant for weeks. Every time I bring up the wedding, you shut down. If you're having second thoughts, I need to know." He stopped chewing and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The candles flickered between us, casting shadows that made his face look older, more tired than I'd ever seen it. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he finally said. The words hit me like a physical blow. 5 years together, 8 months engaged, 16 weeks before our wedding day. And now he doesn't know if he's ready. "Ready for what, exactly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Marriage. All of it. The commitment, the expectations, He gestured vaguely at the space between us. "The forever part." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What changed? You proposed to me. You got down on one knee in front of my entire family and asked me to spend my life with you. What's different now?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd always found endearing but now seemed like he was trying to escape from his own thoughts. "The guys at work have been talking about marriage, about how it changes everything, how you lose your freedom, your identity, how women change after the wedding, become demanding and controlling." "The guys at work?" I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You're getting marriage advice from your single coworkers?" "It's not advice exactly, it's just perspective. They've seen their friends get married and watched how everything changed. How the woman they fell in love with becomes someone different once she has that ring and that commitment." I stared at him across our half-eaten dinner, at this man I thought I knew completely. "Do you think I'm going to change? After 5 years together, do you really think a marriage certificate is going to transform me into some demanding monster?" He couldn't meet my eyes. I don't know what to think anymore. The conversation spiraled from there. He talked about feeling pressured, about wondering if we were getting married because it was expected rather than because we truly wanted to. He mentioned friends who'd gotten divorced, statistics he'd heard about marriage failure rates, fears about becoming trapped in something he wasn't sure about. I tried to reason with him, to remind him of all the conversations we'd had about our future, all the plans we'd made together. But every point I made seemed to bounce off him like he'd already made up his mind to doubt everything we'd built together. We barely touched our food after that. The wine went flat, the candles burned down to stubs, and we sat in increasingly uncomfortable silence until he finally got up and started clearing the table. "I think I need some space to think," he said as he loaded the dishwasher. "Space to think about what? About whether you want to marry me after 5 years together? About whether I'm ready for marriage at all?" That night, he slept on the couch. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to process what had just happened. The man I was planning to spend my life with had essentially told me he wasn't sure he wanted to spend his life with me. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. He'd left a note saying he was going out with friends and would be home late. As I sat alone at our kitchen table with my coffee, I realized he'd rather spend Saturday discussing our relationship with his coworkers at a bar than working through our problems with me. The call came at 2:47 on Sunday afternoon. I was folding laundry, trying to keep busy while he was still out with his friends from the night before, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. "Victoria? This is Mike from your fiancé's accounting department." I knew Mike vaguely. They'd worked together for about 3 years, and I'd met him at a few office parties. He sounded uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else than making this phone call. "Hi, Mike. Is everything okay?" There was a long pause. "Look, I've been debating whether to call you all morning, but I think you deserve to know what happened last night." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "We were all at Murphy's Pub, you know, the place downtown with the pool tables. Your fiancé had quite a few drinks, and the conversation turned to relationships, marriage, that kind of thing. Some of the guys were giving him grief about settling down, asking if he was really ready to give up the single life. I sat down heavily on the couch, my hands suddenly shaking. "What did he say?" Mike took a deep breath. He said, God, I hate repeating this, but he said if you were younger and prettier like his coworker Emma, he'd marry you without hesitation. He said that's why he's not sure about the wedding, because he keeps wondering if he could do better. The words hit me like a slap. I felt the blood drain from my face, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. He said, "What?" "I'm sorry, Victoria. I really am." Most of us were shocked. It was cruel and completely out of line. But Tom just kept going. talking about how Emma is only 25 with this perfect figure, while you're 31 and... Mike's voice trailed off. While I'm 31 and what? I managed to ask, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. He said you're getting older, that you've put on weight since you got engaged, and that sometimes he wonders what it would be like to be with someone younger and more attractive. He was comparing you to Emma all night. Her body, her face, her age. It was disgusting. I felt like I was going to be sick. This was the man who'd told me I was beautiful every day for 5 years. The man who'd proposed to me in front of my family, who'd promised to love me for better or worse. And he was sitting in a bar with his friends, discussing my physical shortcomings and comparing me to a 25-year-old coworker like I was a used car he was considering trading in. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Because you deserve better, Mike said firmly. Because what he said was wrong. And because I have a daughter. And I'd want someone to tell her if her fiancé was talking about her that way. The other guys were uncomfortable too. But nobody else had the guts to call you. After I hung up, I sat on the couch in stunned silence. Emma. I knew who she was. She'd started in his department about 6 months ago, fresh out of college with bright eyes and an enthusiasm for everything. I'd met her at the company Christmas party, and she'd seemed nice enough. Young, pretty, bubbly in that way that only comes with being 25 and having the whole world ahead of you. I'd never felt threatened by her because I'd trusted him completely. Now I realized how naive that had been. The front door opened at 6:30, and he walked in looking slightly hungover but trying to appear normal. "Hey, babe," he said, kissing my cheek like nothing had happened. "Sorry I'm late. We ended up watching the game after lunch." I stared at him. This man who'd spent the previous night telling his coworkers that I wasn't young enough or pretty enough for him. Who'd been comparing my 31-year-old body to that of a woman 6 years younger. Who'd been questioning whether he could do better than the woman he'd asked to marry him. "How was your night?" I asked quietly. "Fine. Just the usual guy stuff. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. Because I'd never sat around with my friends discussing whether my fiancé was attractive enough for me or whether I could find someone better looking or younger or more successful. I'd never reduced the man I loved to a checklist of physical attributes and found him lacking. "Did you talk about us?" I asked. He shrugged, opening the refrigerator. "Not really. Just mentioned the wedding stress, you know." He was lying to my face with the same mouth that had told a group of his coworkers that I wasn't pretty enough for him. The same voice that had promised to love and cherish me was the one that had spent hours the night before cataloging my physical flaws compared to a woman 6 years younger. I wanted to confront him right then, to scream and cry and demand explanations. But I also wanted to see how deep this betrayal went, how long he would continue lying to me while planning our life together. So I just nodded and went back to folding laundry, my hands shaking as I tried to process that the man I was going to marry in 15 weeks thought I wasn't good enough for him. The call from his mother came Tuesday morning while he was at work. I almost didn't answer. I'd been avoiding most phone calls since Mike's revelation, not trusting my voice to sound normal. But something about seeing her name on the screen made me pick up. "Victoria, honey, I need to talk to you," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "Can we meet for coffee today? It's important." An hour later, I sat across from her at our usual cafe downtown, watching this woman who'd been like a second mother to me for 5 years struggle with words she clearly didn't want to say. She kept fidgeting with her coffee cup, starting sentences and stopping, looking everywhere except at my face. "I heard about what happened Saturday night," she finally said. "My son came by Sunday evening, and he was drunk and rambling about work stress and wedding pressure. But then he started talking about this Emma girl, and..." She shook her head. "I can't stay quiet about this anymore." "What did he tell you?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "He's obsessed with her, Victoria. Not just attracted. Obsessed. He talks about her constantly when he thinks no one's listening. He mentions what she wore to work, what she said in meetings, how she laughs at his jokes. He compares everything to her. The restaurants she likes, the movies she mentions, even the way she does her hair." I felt that familiar sick feeling in my stomach. How long has this been going on? Months. Since she started working there. At first I thought it was just a harmless crush. You know, the kind married men sometimes get. But it's gotten worse. He follows her on social media. Knows her schedule, even knows what kind of coffee she orders. He's learned things about her that he has no business knowing. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Nothing physical has happened. I truly believe that. But emotionally, he's already left your relationship. He's building a fantasy around this girl who probably has no idea how he feels." I thought about all the evenings he'd come home distracted, All the times he'd mentioned Emma said this or Emma thinks that in casual conversation. I'd thought he was just being friendly with a new coworker. I'd never imagined he was cataloging every detail of her existence. "There's more," his mother continued, her voice getting softer. "He told me Saturday night that he keeps wondering what it would be like to start over with someone young and fresh, someone without the history and expectations you two have built up. He said being with you feels like wearing old clothes, comfortable but not exciting anymore." The metaphor cut deep. After 5 years together, I'd become old clothes to him, familiar, reliable, but not something that made his heart race anymore. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, echoing the question I'd asked Mike. Her eyes filled with tears. "Because I see my own marriage in this situation. Your father-in-law did the same thing to me when our son was 15. He found a younger woman, spent months obsessing over her, comparing me to her, making me feel like I wasn't enough. I stayed silent, hoped it would pass, thought if I just tried harder to be what he wanted, he'd remember why he chose me. What happened? He left us for her. And you know what? That relationship lasted exactly 8 months before she found someone even younger and more exciting. He came crawling back, but by then I'd realized I deserved better than someone who saw me as a consolation prize." She squeezed my hand harder. "I won't watch another woman go through what I did. You deserve someone who thinks you're the most beautiful woman in the world, not someone who's settling for you while fantasizing about someone else." "He's your son," I pointed out. "Why would you tell me this instead of talking to him?" "Because I've tried talking to him. I've told him he's being disrespectful to you, that he's sabotaging a good relationship for a fantasy. But he just gets defensive and claims I don't understand. He says Emma represents possibilities, while you represent responsibilities." The word responsibilities stung almost as much as everything else. I wasn't his partner anymore. I was a burden he felt obligated to carry. "I love my son," she continued, "but I love you too. And I won't watch him destroy you the way his father tried to destroy me. You're 31 years old, Victoria. You're beautiful, intelligent, successful, and kind. Don't waste any more time on a man who can't see your worth." After she left, I sat in the cafe for another hour, processing everything she'd told me. The man I was supposed to marry in 14 weeks wasn't just having cold feet about marriage. He was actively fantasizing about being with someone else. While I'd been planning our future, he'd been imagining his life with a 25-year-old coworker who probably saw him as nothing more than a friendly older colleague. I thought about all the signs I'd missed, all the conversations about Emma that I'd dismissed as harmless workplace chatter. I remembered how his face would light up when he mentioned her, how he'd started paying more attention to his appearance on workdays, how he'd become critical of little things about me that had never bothered him before. His mother was right. He'd already left our relationship emotionally. I was just the last one to know. I waited until Thursday evening to confront him. I'd spent 2 days rehearsing what I would say, how I would handle his lies and denials. But when he walked through the door that night, looking tired but trying to smile at me like nothing had changed, all my careful planning fell apart. "We need to talk," I said before he could even set down his briefcase. Something in my tone must have warned him. His shoulders tensed and that fake smile disappeared. "About what?" "About Emma." He went very still. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he slowly set his briefcase down and turned to face me fully. "What about Emma?" "About what you said at Murphy's pub on Saturday night. About how if I were younger and prettier like her, you'd marry me without hesitation. About how you've been wondering if you could do better." His face went white, then red. "Who told you that? Does it matter? Is it true?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then ran his hands through his hair in that gesture that used to seem endearing, but now just looked like guilt. "It's not what it sounds like." "Then explain it to me. Explain how telling your coworkers that your fiancé isn't young enough or pretty enough for you is not what it sounds like." I was drunk. The guys were giving me grief about settling down, and I said some stupid things. "It doesn't mean anything." "Stupid things?" I stepped closer to him. "You reduced our 5-year relationship to my appearance compared to a 25-year-old. You told a room full of people that I'm not attractive enough for you. How is that just a stupid thing?" He started pacing around our living room, avoiding my eyes. "You're taking this out of context. I was processing some feelings about the wedding, about commitment. It wasn't about you specifically. It was absolutely about me specifically. You used my name. You compared my body to hers. You talked about my age like it was a defect. I didn't mean it that way." "Then how did you mean it?" "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you've been fantasizing about being with someone else while planning to marry me." Finally, he stopped pacing and looked at me directly. Fine. Yes. I've noticed Emma. She's attractive, she's young, she's different from what I'm used to. But I've never acted on it. I've never even talked to her outside of work. But you've thought about it. Yes. I've thought about what it might be like. The admission hung in the air between us like a physical thing. After 5 years together, after 8 months of engagement, after all our plans and promises, he was admitting to fantasizing about another woman. What exactly have you thought about? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. I can't tell you that. You can, and you will. Because I'm not marrying a man who sees me as his second choice. He sank into our armchair, looking defeated. She's uncomplicated. She's excited about everything, enthusiastic about life. She doesn't have expectations about the future or demands about commitment. When I see her, I remember what it felt like to be young and have possibilities instead of responsibilities. Responsibilities. That's what I am to you now? That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. Your mother told me you said I represent responsibilities while Emma represents possibilities. His head snapped up. You talked to my mother? She called me. She's watched you obsess over this girl for months. She knows about the social media stalking, the way you memorize her schedule, how you light up when you talk about her. She told me because she didn't want to watch me go through what she went through with your father. For the first time, he looked genuinely ashamed. I didn't realize I was being that obvious. You weren't being obvious, you were being obsessed. Do you follow my social media that closely? Do you know my coffee order by heart? Do you pay attention to what I wear or say the way you do with her? He couldn't answer, which was answer enough. Here's what I need to know, I continued. If Emma walked up to you tomorrow and said she wanted to be with you, would you leave me for her? That's not a fair question. It's the only question that matters. Would you? He stared at the floor for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a confusion that broke my heart. I don't know. After 5 years together, after promising to spend your life with me, you don't know if you'd choose me over a fantasy about a 25-year-old coworker? It's not that simple. It absolutely is that simple. Either you want to marry me, or you don't. Either you think I'm beautiful and worth committing to, or you think you can do better with someone younger and prettier. There's no middle ground here. He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Sometimes I look at you and I see our whole future laid out. The mortgage, the kids, the routine, growing old together. And sometimes that feels like enough, like what I want. But other times, I look at Emma and I see adventure and excitement and the possibility of feeling young again. So you're saying I'm boring. I'm saying you're safe. And maybe I'm not ready for safe. The words landed like physical blows. Safe, boring, responsible. A consolation prize compared to the excitement of someone younger and prettier. After everything we'd built together, I'd become the sensible choice he wasn't sure he wanted to make. I couldn't sleep after our conversation. By Friday afternoon, I'd made a decision that might have been crazy but felt necessary. I needed to hear Emma's side of the situation. If my fiancé was building a fantasy around her, I wanted to know if she was aware of it, or if she was as innocent in this as I hoped. I knew where she worked. The same accounting firm as him, 3 floors down. I also knew she usually grabbed coffee from the shop across the street around 3 p.m., because he'd mentioned it enough times for me to memorize her routine along with him. I waited outside the coffee shop, feeling like a stalker but needing answers. When she emerged with her usual vanilla latte, I approached her before I could lose my nerve. Emma? I'm Victoria. I'm engaged to your coworker from the 7th floor. She looked confused for a moment, then recognition dawned. Oh, from the Christmas party. Hi, how are the wedding plans going? Her enthusiasm was genuine, which somehow made everything worse. She had no idea that my fiancé had been using her as ammunition against our relationship. That's actually what I need to talk to you about. Could we sit down for a few minutes? We found a table in the corner of the coffee shop, and I watched her face as I explained what had happened. Her initial confusion gave way to shock, then disgust, then something that looked like genuine anger. He said, "What about you?" she asked, her voice rising. That if I were younger and prettier like you, he'd marry me without hesitation, that he wonders if he could do better. Oh my God. She covered her face with her hands. Victoria, I am so sorry. I had no idea he was thinking about me that way, let alone comparing us. So you've never encouraged him, never flirted or given him signals? Absolutely not. She looked horrified. He's engaged. And even if he wasn't, He's 15 years older than me and my supervisor's colleague. I've always been completely professional with him, but he knows a lot about you. Your schedule, your coffee order, what you post on social media. Her expression darkened. I've noticed him around more than seemed normal. He always happens to be in the break room when I am. He comments on my social media posts within minutes of me posting them. And he asks a lot of personal questions that feel inappropriate coming from someone that senior. Have you encouraged any of it? God, no. I've been trying to figure out how to handle it without making things awkward at work. I don't want to get him in trouble, but his attention has been making me uncomfortable for months. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that Emma wasn't some manipulative woman trying to steal my fiancé, but sadness that my situation was even worse than I'd thought. He wasn't just comparing me to her. He was essentially harassing a younger coworker who wanted nothing to do with his attention. There's something else, Emma said, looking uncomfortable. Last month, there was this group happy hour after work. Most of the department went, and we were all sitting around talking. The conversation turned to relationships, and someone asked him about his wedding plans. What did he say? He said he was having second thoughts about settling down so young. Someone pointed out that 36 isn't that young, and he said he meant settling down with someone who was already 31. He said maybe he should find someone who still had their whole 20s ahead of them, someone who hadn't already lived through their fun years. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. He'd been having these conversations about me with his coworkers for months, not just that one night at Murphy's pub. I was mortified, Emma continued. Everyone was uncomfortable. It was so disrespectful to you, and it made me realize that his attention toward me wasn't innocent. He was using me as an example of what he wished he had instead of you. Did anyone say anything to him? A couple of people tried to change the subject, but he kept going. He talked about how marriage was supposed to be about settling down, but he wasn't sure he wanted to settle. He said looking at younger women in the office made him question whether he was ready to commit to someone his own age. I felt sick. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by pre-wedding jitters. This was a pattern of disrespect that had been going on for months. I want you to know, Emma said, leaning forward earnestly, that using someone as a measuring stick against their partner is disgusting. You deserve so much better than a man who talks about you that way behind your back. Thank you for being honest with me. Can I be even more honest? She asked. From what I've observed, he has this fantasy about me that has nothing to do with who I actually am. He thinks I'm this carefree, exciting person because I'm 25, but I work 60-hour weeks, I live with 2 roommates to afford rent, and I spend most of my free time studying for my CPA exam. I'm not more fun or exciting than you. I'm just younger, and he's projecting all these ideas onto me. What kind of ideas? That I'm spontaneous, that I don't have expectations, that I'd be grateful just to be with someone like him. But the truth is, I want the same things most women want. Respect, commitment, partnership. The idea that I'd be some low-maintenance fantasy girlfriend is insulting to both of us. As I walked back to my car, I realized that Emma had given me more respect and honesty in 30 minutes than my fiancé had given me in months. She was right. He'd built a fantasy around her that had nothing to do with reality and everything to do with his own fears about commitment and growing up. But knowing that didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. If anything, it made it worse. He wasn't just comparing me to another woman. He was comparing me to an imaginary version of another woman that existed only in his mind. I arranged the dinner for Sunday evening at his parents' house. His mother had offered to host after I called her Saturday morning, my voice shaking as I told her what I'd learned from Emma. She'd been quiet for a long moment before saying, "It's time for some hard truths in this family." He didn't want to come. When I told him his parents wanted to discuss the wedding situation, he tried to make excuses about work and stress and not wanting to involve family in our personal problems. But I made it clear this wasn't optional. If he wanted any chance of salvaging our relationship, he needed to face the people who'd watched him disrespect me for months. His father was already seated at the dining room table when we arrived, looking uncomfortable, but determined. His mother had set out her good china, as if the formal setting might lend gravity to what was about to happen. I sat across from my fiancé, with his parents flanking us like referees in a boxing match. Before anyone says anything, I began, I want to make something clear. I'm not here to be talked into staying in this relationship. I'm here because I think you all deserve to hear exactly what's been happening, and what kind of man you've been defending. His father frowned. Victoria, I'm sure whatever problems you two are having can be worked out. Can they? I interrupted. Can you work out the fact that your son has spent months telling his coworkers that I'm too old and not pretty enough for him? That he's been obsessing over a 25-year-old colleague and using her as proof that he could do better than me? The silence that followed was deafening. I could see his father processing the words, his expression shifting from confusion to disgust. His mother just nodded sadly, as if she'd been expecting this moment for months. "Tell them," I said to my fiancé, who was staring at his plate. "Tell your parents what you told your coworkers about me." "This is private," he mumbled. "Nothing about this is private anymore. You made it public when you discussed my inadequacies with a room full of people. So tell them. Tell your father what you said about my age and my appearance." He finally looked up, his face flushed with shame and anger. "Fine. I said some things I shouldn't have said. I was drunk and frustrated about the wedding pressure, and I made some comparisons I shouldn't have made." "What kind of comparisons?" his father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I said that if Victoria were younger and more attractive like a woman I work with, I'd be more excited about getting married." His father's face went white, then red. "You said, what about the woman you're supposed to marry in 3 months?" "I was drunk. Being drunk doesn't make you say things you don't believe," his mother said sharply. "It just makes you say things you normally keep to yourself. Is that really how you see Victoria? As too old and not pretty enough? It's complicated." I leaned forward. "No, it's not complicated. You've been having an emotional affair with a fantasy version of your coworker while planning to marry me. You've been discussing my physical flaws with anyone who'll listen while expecting me to commit my life to you. You've reduced 5 years of love and partnership to whether I measure up to a 25-year-old's body." "I never had an affair," he protested. "You followed her social media obsessively. You memorized her schedule. You learned her personal preferences and compared them to mine. You built a relationship with her in your mind while neglecting the real relationship you had with me. What would you call that?" His father was staring at his son like he didn't recognize him. "This is how you treat a woman who's devoted 5 years of her life to you? This is how you prepare for marriage? You don't understand the pressure I've been under." "I understand pressure," his father snapped. "I've been married to your mother for 42 years. I understand cold feet and wedding stress and wondering if you're making the right choice. But I have never, not once, sat in a bar with my friends and discussed whether my wife was attractive enough for me." "Your mother went through enough disrespect from your father when you were a teenager," his mother added, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "I will not watch her go through the same thing with you." I felt a surge of gratitude toward these people who had every reason to side with their son, but chose to stand with me instead. "Here's what I want you all to understand," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "I don't care if you want someone younger and prettier. I don't care if you think Emma or any other woman would make you happier. What I care about is that you think it's acceptable to treat me this way while asking me to marry you." I stood up, surprising everyone at the table. I spent 5 years loving a man I thought loved me back. I spent 8 months planning a wedding with someone who was fantasizing about being with someone else. I've been patient and understanding about your cold feet and your stress, but I will not be patient about being disrespected and degraded. "Victoria, please sit down," his mother said gently. "Let's talk this through." "There's nothing to talk through. He's shown me exactly how he sees me, and I'm finally listening. You can find someone younger and prettier if that's what you want. But you won't find someone who loved you the way I did, or someone who would have been as loyal as I've been. And I guarantee you won't find someone who'll put up with being your second choice." I walked toward the door, then turned back to face him one last time. "The wedding is off. You can explain to the guests why. You can deal with the deposits and the cancellations, and you can spend the rest of your life wondering if the fantasy was worth losing the reality." As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't trying to save a relationship with someone who didn't value me. I was finally walking away from someone who saw me as not good enough, and toward a future where I wouldn't accept anything less than being someone's first choice. The cancellation announcements went out Monday morning. I'd spent Sunday night crafting a simple, dignified message. Victoria and his name have mutually decided to call off their wedding. They ask for privacy during this time and appreciate everyone's understanding. But by Wednesday, the real story was making its way through our social circles. And it wasn't coming from me. His mother called me that afternoon, sounding both apologetic and furious. "I thought you should know that Emma filed a complaint with HR yesterday. Apparently, his behavior toward her was worse than any of us realized." "What kind of complaint?" "Sexual harassment. She documented months of inappropriate attention. Him finding excuses to be near her workstation, commenting on her appearance, asking personal questions about her dating life, even following her to the parking garage after work hours. She finally decided to speak up after learning about what he said at Murphy's pub. I felt a mix of vindication and disgust. Emma had been dealing with harassment while I'd been planning my wedding to her harasser. There's more, his mother continued. HR interviewed other people in the department, and apparently his behavior was an open secret. Multiple coworkers witnessed inappropriate comments and attention. They're conducting a full investigation. Is he going to lose his job? He's been suspended pending the investigation. And honestly, Victoria, I hope he faces consequences. What he did to you was horrible, but what he did to that poor girl was predatory. The story spread through our friend groups like wildfire. By Friday, I was getting calls and texts from people I hadn't talked to in months, all expressing shock and support. The narrative that emerged wasn't the one he'd probably hoped for. Mike from his office called to check on me. I wanted you to know that most of us are disgusted by what happened. The way he talked about you, the way he pursued Emma despite her obvious discomfort. It's opened a lot of our eyes about who he really is. How is he handling the HR investigation? Not well. He's been calling people, trying to get us to downplay what we witnessed or heard. He even had the nerve to ask me to change my story about the Murphy's pub incident. He claims he was just venting about wedding stress, not seriously comparing you to Emma. But you were there. You heard what he actually said. I heard him spend 2 hours systematically tearing down everything about you, while building up fantasies about a woman young enough to be his little sister. There's no spin that makes that acceptable. The social media fallout was swift and brutal. Someone had screenshotted his excessive interactions with Emma's posts. The immediate likes, the flirty comments, the way he'd started mirroring her interests in his own posts. Friends began connecting the dots between his online behavior and the canceled wedding. My maid of honor posted a simple message. Some people show you who they really are when they think no one is watching. I'm proud of my friend for choosing self-respect over settling for someone who couldn't see her worth. The comments that followed were overwhelmingly supportive of me and critical of him. People shared their own stories of partners who'd made them feel not enough and praised my decision to walk away rather than compete with fantasies. His college friends, men who'd known him for 15 years, started distancing themselves from him publicly. One posted, "Real men don't tear down the women who love them to build up fantasies about women they'll never have." Disgusting behavior from someone I thought I knew. The professional consequences extended beyond HR. His reputation in the industry took a hit as word spread about the harassment complaint and his treatment of me. Emma wasn't just some random woman. She was well-liked and respected by colleagues who now saw him as someone who'd abused his seniority to make a younger coworker uncomfortable. Thursday evening, his mother invited me to dinner, just the two of us. We sat in her kitchen, the same place where she'd helped me plan engagement party menus and discussed wedding traditions. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I saw the signs of what he was becoming, and I should have spoken up sooner." "You did speak up. You told me about Emma when I needed to know. I should have told him that his behavior was unacceptable before it got to this point. I should have raised a son who knew better than to treat women this way. He's 36 years old. His character isn't your responsibility anymore." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "His father and I are ashamed. We've watched you grow into an amazing woman over the past 5 years. You've been kind to our family, patient with our son, and a joy to have in our lives. The way he repaid that loyalty is unforgivable. Thank you for saying that. I want you to know that you'll always be family to us, regardless of what our son did. You showed incredible strength in walking away from someone who didn't deserve you." As I drove home that night, I realized that the humiliation I'd feared never materialized. Instead of being seen as the woman who wasn't good enough, I was being recognized as the woman who was too good to accept being treated as second best. The shame belonged entirely to him, and the community of people who truly mattered was making that very clear. Moving out of our shared apartment was both heartbreaking and liberating. I'd found a small one-bedroom place across town. Nothing fancy, but it was mine alone. As I packed 5 years of shared memories into boxes, I kept discovering how much of myself I'd lost, trying to be what I thought he wanted. There were clothes I'd stopped wearing because he'd made subtle comments about them being too young for me or not flattering. Books I'd hidden because he'd rolled his eyes at my romance novel phase. Hobbies I'd abandoned because he'd called them silly or time-consuming. I'd been slowly erasing myself to fit into his vision of what a 31-year-old woman should be. The financial separation was surprisingly empowering. For years, I'd deferred to his opinions on money. He made slightly more than me and had strong opinions about practical purchases. Now, sorting through our joint expenses, I realized how much of my own financial independence I'd given up. I'd been splitting everything equally despite him controlling most of the decisions. You know what the craziest part is? I told my sister as we unpacked boxes in my new kitchen. I actually make decent money. I've been successful in my career. I have good savings. I can afford this place on my own. But somehow I let him convince me that I needed his approval for every purchase over $50. He was controlling you financially too? Not overtly. But he had this way of making me feel guilty about spending money on myself. If I wanted new clothes, he'd ask if I really needed them. If I wanted to go out with friends, he'd mention how expensive restaurants had become. Meanwhile, he never questioned his own spending on craft beer or those expensive headphones he just had to have. Setting up my own space felt like rediscovering who I was. I bought bright throw pillows for the couch, colors he'd always said were too bold for our neutral decor. I hung up artwork I loved but had kept in storage because he'd called it too feminine. I filled the apartment with plants, something he'd always vetoed because of the maintenance. My first solo grocery shopping trip was revelatory. For 5 years, I'd been buying foods he liked, cooking meals he preferred, avoiding spices he found too strong. Standing in the produce aisle, I realized I didn't even remember what my own food preferences were anymore. I bought ingredients I hadn't cooked with in years. Fresh ginger, exotic mushrooms, the spicy peppers I'd loved before he'd complained they upset his stomach. That night, cooking dinner just for myself, I felt more satisfied than I had in months. The hardest part was rebuilding my relationship with mirrors. His constant comparisons to Emma had made me hypercritical of my own appearance. I'd started seeing my 31-year-old face and body through his critical lens, focusing on every line, every imperfection, every sign that I wasn't 25 anymore. My therapist, Dr. Patterson, had given me homework. Spend 5 minutes each morning looking in the mirror and saying one positive thing about myself. The first week, I could barely manage, "Your hair looks healthy." But gradually, I started seeing myself as more than a collection of flaws compared to a younger woman. "I have kind eyes," I told my reflection on a Thursday morning. "I have strong hands that create beautiful things." Small affirmations, but they were mine, not dependent on anyone else's approval or comparison. The loneliness hit hardest in the evenings. After 5 years of shared routines, coming home to an empty apartment felt strange and quiet. But slowly, I began to appreciate the silence. No one was questioning my choice of TV shows or sighing dramatically when I wanted to read instead of watch sports. I started taking evening walks around my new neighborhood, something I'd stopped doing when he'd complained about me being out after dark. I discovered a bookstore 3 blocks away, a coffee shop that made amazing lavender lattes, a small park where I could sit and think without interruption. 3 weeks into my new life, I ran into an old college friend at that coffee shop. Maria took one look at me and said, "You look different. Lighter somehow." "I feel different," I admitted. Like I'm remembering who I used to be before I started trying to be someone else's ideal woman. The breakup was hard, but it was the right choice. The breakup was devastating, but staying would have destroyed me slowly. I was becoming smaller and smaller, trying to fit into his vision of what I should be. Now I'm remembering that I'm allowed to take up space. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a long bath with expensive bath salts, lit candles around the tub, and read a romance novel without feeling guilty about it. It was a small act of self-care, but it felt revolutionary. I was learning that rebuilding self-esteem wasn't about convincing myself I was perfect. It was about remembering that I was enough, exactly as I was. Not too old, not too demanding, not too much. Just enough. He showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after I'd moved out. I saw him through the peephole, standing in the hallway looking nervous and rehearsed, probably having practiced whatever speech he'd prepared. For a moment, I considered not answering, but I knew this conversation needed to happen eventually. "What do you want?" I asked through the door. "Please, Victoria, just 5 minutes. I need to talk to you." I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked terrible, thinner than when I'd last seen him, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble that suggested he hadn't been taking care of himself. Part of me felt a familiar urge to comfort him, but I pushed it down. His suffering wasn't my responsibility anymore. "You look good," he said, and I could see him taking in my appearance. I was wearing a bright blue dress I'd bought the week before, one that made me feel confident and beautiful. "This place is nice too." "What do you want?" I repeated. "I want to apologize. I want to explain what happened, and I want to see if there's any way we can work through this." "There isn't. Just hear me out." "Please, I know I made mistakes, but I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realize now how wrong I was. The thing with Emma was never real. It was just me panicking about commitment and projecting fantasies onto someone who meant nothing to me." I leaned against my doorframe, not inviting him in, but listening to see where this would go. I was scared about getting married, about growing up and taking on all those responsibilities. When I saw Emma, she represented this fantasy of staying young, of not having to face adult commitments. But it was never about her specifically, and it was never about you not being enough. So you destroyed our 5-year relationship because you were scared of growing up? I know how it sounds, but I've had time to think, and I realize what a mistake I made. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You're beautiful, intelligent, successful, kind, everything I should want in a partner. I was an idiot to let my fears make me forget that. His words might have moved me 6 weeks earlier, but now they just sounded hollow. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about me like I'm a good deal you almost passed up. Like I'm a sensible choice you should appreciate more. That's not what I mean. It's exactly what you mean. You're not saying you love me passionately or that you can't live without me. You're saying I'm a good catch that you were foolish to undervalue. You're still seeing me as a practical decision rather than the love of your life. He stepped closer, and I could smell his familiar cologne. I do love you. I've always loved you. No. You loved the idea of me. You loved having a girlfriend who was stable and supportive and easy to be with. But when it came time to commit to me as a real person, someone who ages, someone who has needs and expectations, someone who isn't a fantasy, you balked. I'm ready to commit now. I want to marry you, have the life we planned together. Because your fantasy didn't work out? Because Emma filed a harassment complaint and you realized she was never interested in you? Because your reputation is damaged and you need someone loyal to help rebuild it? His face flushed. It's not like that. Then tell me, if Emma had been interested in you, would you be here right now trying to win me back? He was quiet for too long, which was answer enough. That's what I thought. You don't want me back because you realized I'm amazing and you made a mistake. You want me back because I'm safe and available and willing to forgive you. You want me back because starting over with someone new would be difficult, and I represent the easy path. Victoria, please. I know I hurt you, but we can get past this. We have 5 years of history together. That has to count for something. It does count for something. It counts as 5 years of my life that I gave to someone who saw me as his consolation prize. 5 years of loving someone who was always wondering if he could do better. I straightened up, preparing to close the door. I've learned something important over the past 6 weeks. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who sees me as the sensible choice. I'd rather start over completely than spend my life with someone who settled for me. I wasn't settling. I chose you. You chose me because I was there, because I was convenient, because I fit into your life without requiring too much adjustment. But you never chose me because you thought I was the most amazing woman in the world. And that's what I deserve. Someone who chooses me because they can't imagine being with anyone else. You're being unrealistic. That kind of fairy tale love doesn't exist in real life. Maybe not. But I'd rather spend my life searching for it than accepting someone who thinks loving me is a reasonable compromise. He stood there for another moment, seeming to realize that no argument was going to change my mind. I hope you find what you're looking for, he said finally, though his tone suggested he thought I was making a mistake. I hope you grow up and learn to value the people who love you before they get tired of not being valued. After I closed the door, I leaned against it for a few minutes, processing the conversation. I felt sad but not regretful. He'd confirmed everything I'd suspected, that he saw me as the safe choice he should have been grateful for, not the irreplaceable love of his life. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I was absolutely certain I'd made the right choice. 2 months after his failed reconciliation attempt, I was surprised to receive a text from his mother asking if I'd like to meet for lunch. I'd been wondering if maintaining that relationship was healthy or wise, but something about her message felt important. We met at a small bistro downtown, the kind of place where we used to plan family gatherings and holiday menus. She looked older than I remembered, more tired, but her smile was genuine when she saw me. You look wonderful, she said, embracing me warmly, truly radiant. Thank you. How are you doing with everything? She sighed as we sat down. It's been difficult. Watching your child make such destructive choices, realizing you raised someone capable of treating people that way, it changes how you see yourself as a parent. His choices aren't a reflection of your parenting. He's an adult who made selfish decisions. Perhaps. But I keep thinking about the conversations I should have had with him about respecting women, about what real love looks like. Maybe if his father and I had modeled a healthier relationship, he would have understood that love isn't about finding the perfect person. It's about choosing to see someone as perfect for you. I thought about what she was saying. What's happened with him since the HR investigation? He was terminated. The investigation found a pattern of inappropriate behavior not just toward Emma, but toward other young women in the office over the past few years. Apparently, he'd created an uncomfortable environment for several people. I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Is he facing any legal consequences? Emma chose not to pursue criminal charges, but she did file a civil complaint. His reputation in the industry is essentially destroyed. He's having trouble finding work, and most of our mutual friends have distanced themselves from him. I'm sorry you're dealing with the fallout from his choices. Don't be sorry. I'm proud of Emma for standing up for herself, and I'm proud of you for refusing to accept being treated as second best. You've both shown more courage than my son ever has. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I wanted to see you because I need you to know that losing you isn't just his loss. It's ours too. You've been like a daughter to me for 5 years. I understand if maintaining a relationship with his family isn't something you want, but I hope you know that our love for you isn't conditional on your relationship with him. I felt tears prick my eyes. I've missed you too, but I wasn't sure if it would be appropriate to maintain contact. More than appropriate, necessary. Your family, Victoria. Real family. And real family doesn't abandon each other when things get complicated. We spent the rest of lunch catching up on my new life, my therapy progress, and my plans for the future. She told me about the trip to Europe she'd been planning with his father, something they'd put off for years while enabling their son's poor choices. We're learning to stop making excuses for him, she admitted. For too long, we justified his behavior, blamed his stress or his fears instead of holding him accountable. Watching what he did to you was a wake-up call. What's he doing now? Living in a studio apartment across town, working temporary jobs while trying to rebuild his reputation. He's started therapy, which is overdue by about 20 years. But honestly, I don't know if he's capable of the kind of genuine self-reflection that real change requires. Do you think he understands what he lost? I think he understands that he lost something valuable. But I don't think he understands why his behavior was so destructive, or how to avoid repeating the same patterns. He still talks about what happened like it was a series of unfortunate misunderstandings rather than deliberate choices to disrespect you. After lunch, she walked me to my car. I want you to promise me something, she said. Promise me you won't settle for less than you deserve in your next relationship. Promise me you'll hold out for someone who sees you the way you should be seen, as an incredible woman who any man would be lucky to have. I promise. I'm learning what healthy love looks like, and I won't accept anything less. Good. And promise me you'll stay in touch. Just because my son was too foolish to appreciate you doesn't mean the rest of us don't recognize what we almost lost. That evening, I called Dr. Patterson to discuss the lunch. How did it feel to maintain that relationship? She asked. Healing, actually. It reminded me that the problem wasn't with me. It was specifically with him. His own family recognizes that he treated me badly and that I deserved better. That's significant progress. You're learning to separate your worth from his inability to see it. I'm also learning what I actually want in a relationship. Not just someone who won't cheat or lie or compare me to other women. That's bare minimum. I want someone who actively chooses me every day, who sees my age and experience as assets rather than liabilities, who celebrates my success instead of feeling threatened by it. Those are healthy standards. For the first time in years, I'm not trying to shrink myself to fit into someone else's vision of what I should be. I'm expanding into who I actually am, and I'm not going to apologize for taking up space. That night, I started planning something I'd been thinking about for weeks. A solo trip to somewhere I'd always wanted to visit. Not as a consolation prize for my failed relationship, but as a celebration of my newfound independence and self-respect. 3 months after walking away from a man who saw me as not enough, I'm writing this from a cafe overlooking the Mediterranean Sea in Barcelona. The irony isn't lost on me. This is where we were supposed to honeymoon. I'd kept the tickets after canceling the wedding, thinking maybe I'd use them someday. That someday turned out to be now, and I'm here alone by choice. The trip almost didn't happen. 2 weeks before leaving, I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked surprised to see me. Then his eyes took in my appearance with that familiar, assessing look. I was wearing a sundress I'd bought for the trip, my hair longer than he'd ever liked it, my confidence visible in the way I carried myself. You look different, he said, blocking my path between the produce section. I feel different. I heard you're going to Spain. That was supposed to be our honeymoon destination. Now it's my celebration of new beginnings destination. He shifted uncomfortably. Victoria, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I made you feel like a consolation prize. I want you to know that wasn't true. I did love you. Past tense noted. I still love you. I I didn't know how to handle my fears about commitment and aging and settling down, but I've been in therapy, and I'm starting to understand how my issues affected our relationship. I looked at this man who had once been the center of my world, and felt nothing but mild irritation that he was making me late for my evening plans. I'm glad you're getting help, but this conversation is 3 months too late and completely irrelevant to my life now. Don't you think we owe it to 5 years together to try again? To see if we can work through this now that I understand what went wrong? What we owe to those 5 years is to learn from them. I learned that I deserve better than someone who sees loving me as settling. What did you learn? He was quiet for a moment. I learned that I lost the best thing that ever happened to me. No, you learned that actions have consequences. If you'd actually learned that I was the best thing that ever happened to you, you would have treated me that way when you had the chance. I started to push my cart past him, but he stepped sideways again. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for how I treated you. The rest of your life should be spent learning how to value people before you lose them, so you don't make the same mistakes with someone else. But it won't be spent making anything up to me, because I'm done accepting apologies in place of respect. So that's it? 5 years together means nothing? 5 years together means everything. It taught me exactly what I will and won't accept in my next relationship. It taught me that I'd rather be single than be with someone who thinks I'm not good enough. It taught me that my worth isn't determined by whether someone chooses to see it. This time when I moved my cart, he didn't try to stop me. Now, sitting in this Spanish cafe with a book I actually want to read and a glass of wine I chose because I like it, not because someone else approved of it, I feel genuinely grateful for everything that happened. Not grateful for the pain or the betrayal, but grateful that it happened early enough for me to rebuild my life, instead of spending decades with someone who saw me as his reasonable compromise. The woman at the table next to me is about my age, maybe a few years older, traveling with her husband. I watched them earlier as they navigated the menu together, him deferring to her language skills, her lighting up when he complimented her pronunciation of the Spanish words. They hold hands while they read, and he looks at her the way I always hoped someone would look at me, like she's the most fascinating person in the room. That's what I'm holding out for now. Not someone who thinks I'm a good enough choice, but someone who thinks I'm the only choice that makes sense for them. My phone buzzes with a text from his mother. Thinking of you on your trip. I hope you're having the adventure you deserve. I smile and text back a photo of my tapas and wine with the caption, having the time of my life. Thank you for reminding me I deserve to be chosen, not settled for. Tomorrow I'm taking a flamenco class, something I mentioned wanting to do years ago before he dismissed it as too cliché for tourists. Next week I'm hiking in the mountains, then spending 3 days at a wellness retreat focused on self-discovery and empowerment. But tonight, I'm just sitting here being grateful that I had enough self-respect to walk away from someone who couldn't see my worth. I'm grateful that I chose dignity over desperation, standards over settling, and my own happiness over trying to fix someone else's brokenness. The sun is setting over Barcelona, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And for the first time in years, I'm not wondering if someone else would appreciate this moment more than I do. I'm not comparing myself to younger women or worrying about whether I'm exciting enough or pretty enough or anything enough. I'm just enough exactly as I am. And someday, someone will be smart enough to see that from the very beginning.